Welcome back to the night shift. Your safe space to talk about UFOs, UAPs, NHI disclosure, and everything else that's happening in this crazy timeline. If you're watching this show, you were in the right timeline. Or maybe you're in the wrong timeline. I don't know. We're in some kind of timeline. And this one's weird.
It's wild.
Doctor, it's wild. It's wild. And we have a great show tonight. Welcome, everyone. I don't even know how to get into this show, but we'll figure it out as we go. It's 2:04 p.m. on the East Coast. It's Friday. That means it's time for Night Shift Live. We have two special guests with us today. Dan Cleary from Others from Another Mother, and of course, Pavel from Secrecy is here to help us unpack and decode the interview that is breaking the internet right now. Probably the most important. I think we all kind of agree this is going to be the most important interview in the history of ufology, more or less. So we're going to dig into it. And if you don't know what we're talking about, let me just give you a brief heads up on who Dr. Harald Malmgren is. Dr. Harald Malmgren was a renowned economist, strategist, and advisor whose work shaped global economic and defense policy across generations. He passed away on February 13th, 2025, leaving behind a legacy of intellectual depth, public service, and systems-level insight. He was educated at Yale, Oxford, and Harvard. Malmgren studied under influential economists, including Sir John Hicks and Friedrich von Hayek, and made early academic contributions to what later became known as New Institutional Economics. He served as a key member of President Kennedy's whiz kids in the Pentagon, advising during the Cuban Missile Crisis and pioneering new approaches to military escalation and deterrence. In subsequent administrations, Johnson, Nixon, and Ford, he held senior trade roles, leading international negotiations, launching the Tokyo Round, and co-authoring the Landmark Trade Act of 1974. Malmgren later advised the U.S. Congress, founded global consultancy firms, and worked closely with major corporations and sovereign wealth funds. He was instrumental in helping Toyota establish its U.S. manufacturing presence and advise global leaders through institutions such as the OECD, the United Nations, and the Interaction Council. Known for rejecting siloed thinking, Dr. Malmgren was a true systems thinker, connecting economics, defense, and politics into a coherent strategic vision. His influence lives on through the institutions he shaped and the many leaders he mentored. And the reason I'm telling you all this is because Jesse Michaels from American Alchemy, the American Alchemy podcast, did a 4-hour interview with Dr. Malmgren. It dropped this week, and it is astonishing. And I think, as you'll find out if you haven't already seen it, there is not a single wasted moment, as Dan said earlier. So without further ado, we'll get right into it. Dan, Pavel, welcome to the show. How are you guys?
Pavel, go ahead.
Hey, guys. I'm doing fantastically. Happy to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
I feel the same way. Very excited to talk to you guys. I've been itching to talk about it since I watched it, and no one around me wants to talk about it, so I'm so happy to be here.
I know you've been even Xander was texting me. He was like, dude, Dan is on fire about this. It's like,
he's losing his shit. He needs to get here. He needs to get here.
Xander, how about you, man?
Yeah, good. I think you put it well. Like, this really is my first impression of this interview. I've said to you, Dan, I think already, this is probably up there with that, with Bob Lazar's interview with George Knapp. It's up there with David Grush and Ross Coulthard. It's given Malmgren's interwoven history with humanity. He has been central. He's literally saved the world, like from total destruction. And he is, saying that we don't know what's going on, but there's a there, and I think it's official. Like there's a there now.
I think it's somebody at his level is beyond anything I could have expected. Like, to me, he has stitched together all the loose ends that I've been looking at for 20 years now. And the fact that this interview touches on so many of those loose ends and ties them all together, and it's coming from a guy at his position who has been in the rooms that he's been in and talked to the people that he's talked to, it basically feels like this is it. This is the disclosure. This is what it is. It's this. You could take this account and you can kind of color in all the other blank spots from the last 70 years, all the way back. I mean, he fills in the blanks from Magenta, Italy to today with everything in between. I don't know what else you could ask for.
Yeah, Jesse.
Dan, what did you think?
I just, Jesse says it in the interview that Harold's life is almost like a Forrest Gumpian level of like the things he's had his finger on, the rooms he's been in, the situations. It's like there's nothing he wasn't a part of. And like you said, seeing it all tied together over 4 hours was just like a holy shit moment after a holy shit moment after a holy shit moment. And it's just, it's astounding. I think it's incredibly important. And I think it is on the level of the interviews that you just spoke about. Huge. The historical
Pavel.
record, yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Dan. Go ahead, Pavel.
No, that's it.
That final part of the interview, the last like 5 minutes, where Jesse asked him about time travel and the purpose that he has, that really got to me, man. Because in this community, since I've been doing this, I've heard this multiple times that people have this impulse of looking into these topics and trying to find out what's going on. And he's just another one of us in that sense, So that's why I think that resonated with me so much,
You messaged me and you were like, there are parts of this, like, I forget how you worded it, but you were like, I teared up. You get like teary eyed watching it. I still, and I have just truth be told, I still have an hour left to go. I'm like 1 hour away from the end, so I feel like there's a bunch of stuff I'm gonna. Feel free to spoil it for me. That's fine.
He dies in the end.
Does he die
I just
in the end? Oh my god. So where should we start? Let's unpack this for people who haven't seen it all the way through, or people who may haven't seen it at all yet. This is super, super significant for a bunch of different reasons. Let's try to like set the table for people. Harald Malmgren in an extensive 4-hour sit down with Jesse Michaels, who, by the way, does an astonishing job, doesn't miss a beat, asks really, really good follow-up questions, and has an amazing recall. His fucking knowledge base is unbelievable.
It's annoying.
It's annoying. It's like watching Data from Star Trek. He keeps talking, and you're like, how do you know more stuff?
Yeah.
And he sits down with Harald Malmgren, and for 4 hours, they basically talk about the entire history of the program, starting from all the way back in 1933, Magenta, Italy. Possibly you could even say a little bit before that, taking us all the way through to present day, explaining all of the links in the chain along the way, including Philip Corso, Colonel Phil Corso, the author of Day After Roswell, who we talk about on this channel all the time. He comes into play. The Strategic Defense Initiative comes into play. Private conversations between Reagan and Gorbachev come into play. I mean, I felt like I was watching a special that tied together like a 10-season-long HBO series. And I'm just like, this is everything that was in the X-Files compressed into one 4-hour thing, and it's real.
Yeah. Did you guys ever watch that show Dark Skies?
Yes.
The Bryce Zabel's
show. Yeah.
That feels like the Harald Malmgren story. It's because everything ties together where it's like, what? That too? Really? And then it turns out that maybe that all did really happen.
Yeah, and I think that a good place to start would be the whole build up to the interview, because Harold was already, his health was declining a little bit. He said that he felt okay, but I saw a few of the interviews he did with his daughter Pippa, and he did seem pretty frail. And Pippa, about a month ago or so, or 3 weeks ago, she released an article on Substack where she teases a lot of this stuff that they talk about here. And the whole dramatic gravitas that was added, because right after the interview, he was rushed to the hospital because his oxygen levels were falling. And all of that, and he still wanted to talk to Jesse on the way to the hospital. He was like, I gotta tell you this, And to me, it was basically a deathbed confession. And you know what they say about those in legal terms? They're considered truth,
I want to point out real quick that when I was in Las Vegas when I was on tour in August, and it's the first time I got to meet George Knapp and was hanging with him and Corbell backstage at the gig, and talking to George, and I made a comment about Deathbed Confessions, about like what happened to those. Like, we need more Deathbed Confessions, and he said, I think you'll be getting one in not too long. And I wonder if he was speaking about Harald or somebody else, but either way, like it was interesting to hear that there's more coming.
That's what I've kind of been chewing around the edges of for weeks now, months now. Is this like part of a larger planned rollout of information? I mean, clearly he's very frail in the interview. His voice is weak, but he's doing a great job. He communicates a ton of information. And he's got so much command of his faculties. His memory is impeccable.
I was blown away about his recollection of just names, name after name.
And people's titles and titles of people.
Yeah, and Jesse Michaels is also really good at this, but Malgren still beat him there. Every single time in the interview, Malgren's like recalls a name just a couple seconds before Jesse Michaels.
It's like savant. There's savant stuff going on in there, I think, a little bit, maybe.
The two of them together are cool. It's cool to watch. You just feel like intellectually at the end, I was just like, holy shit, what did I just see? These guys are so good. They're the perfect two to put in a room together.
Completely.
And to record. Oh my God, it was so amazing. Harald has been tweeting out for a period of time in the run up to this. He was in failing health. He does this deathbed interview with Jesse Michaels, which is it watches as you're listening to the story unfold. It unfolds like the greatest fucking Steven Spielberg movie you have never seen because it hasn't been made yet. But oh my God, when it does, it's like Star Wars and Indiana Jones and all of it together, and then more so. And it's just like. I feel like we should take it chronologically and just break it down by like the top bits in the first hour maybe, and then move on to hour two and see how far we get. What do you guys think?
Great. Yeah. We should start with the tag along and the Starfish Prime stuff, because that's the kind of first stuff they touch on in the interview as far as the UFO stuff. We can skip past like the missile crisis stuff because that's all historical record, but let's get into the.
It's definitely worth pointing out just before we do get into that side of stuff is that this guy was an historical figure before he decided to do this interview. He's been instrumental in some of the biggest, most important moments in the last 100 years. Yeah. And he hasn't mentioned UAP at this point.
And they open the interview with him basically telling the story of the Cuban, which I think the Cuban Missile Crisis thing is important because he's not even 30 years old. He's not even, he's 23?
27 years old.
27 years old, and he's in the room, and there are 3 hours to go time to launch nuclear Armageddon and wipe out all life on the Earth. And they're in this room, and he's trying to talk these guys off the ledge, and he does. And then, like, what is it? 70 years later, whatever, he's in the room with the Russian ambassador guy, and he's like, how did you do it? And they're like reminiscing about this. This guy he saved the world.
For real.
Before he turned 30 years old. And then he goes on to have the most fucking crazy career you could possibly dream up. It's almost impossible to believe. So talk to us, Dan, go Starfish Prime, Operation Dominic. Go.
Yeah, it seems like it was a series of tests, of kind of nuclear tests to see if we could ward off like a missile attack or whatever. So from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the way they would do it is they would like fire a nuke and then send up an EMP to, interact with the missile and blow it up to keep it from hitting land. And during one of these tests, the bluegill triple prime, right, is the one that apparently was successful and also knocked a UFO into the ocean, which again Harald was a part of. Do I have that right so far?
Yeah.
Right.
The only thing that you left out was they figured out how that worked, and then Jesse had some interesting thoughts on what might be behind the function of the propellant system or propulsion system. But it was something about an X-ray burst, a violent X-ray or a directed X-ray burst coming into contact with a warhead caused the steel inside the warhead to like explode.
from the
or
inside, right?
from the like a shotgun
the
blast,
inside.
and just like blow the whole thing apart. And so there was a test of this months before at Cape Canaveral, where they had the rocket on the pad ready to go, and then a craft appears in the sky, which looks like an orb.
Yep.
It looks like something we have all seen before.
The Atlas test. It's called the Atlas test.
The Atlas test, and then later when they're doing the test out in Starfish Prime test, that's when they're launching it, and the same craft or something like that is following this warhead in flight, and they've got it on camera, and you see the thing come out of the explosion and fall into the ocean.
Yeah.
So
And the
reason-
fucking Navy gets it,
the reason
and
why
he
I was
holds
just
it in his hands.
I was just sharing. I was sharing screen because Chris Sharp actually broke this in December last year. Mm-hmm. It was some
Chris
work
Sharp
by,
is just such a bad.
yeah.
No, it was Jeff Cruikshank.
yes,
Actually,
but it's Chris Sharp's Liberation Times.
yeah.
So yeah, they touched on this back in December 2024. They go through all of this. And Malgren's testimony on top of this is just incredible. But they've even got the because this was split between two different departments, and later there was a Freedom of Information Act against basically both of these entities. One of these entities deemed the information to be, fine, you can declassify it. The other entity disagreed with the other Freedom of Information Act request. So we have one video where we see this orb fall out of the sky after the test is completed, and then we have the other information that is sent over, and we have screenshots here where they just straight up put a big massive triangle over the pictures.
Nothing to see here, fellas.
Yeah, so this was the Department of Naval Intelligence and the Atomic Energy Commission were the two, I think. And they
Yes.
each had their own aircraft flying in proximity to this test, and they were both recording it at the same time. And I think, if I'm remembering right, he says the reason for that is because they didn't share intelligence back and forth, and the DNI was like, fuck off to basically everybody. They're like, we're the oldest intelligence agency, so we do whatever we want. And they decided not to declassify the DNI, right? It was Atomic
Yeah,
Energy
I
Commission.
forget which, but
And that's been happening for decades. It was the Atomic Energy Commission, because those are the ones that, if you didn't have a Q clearance, and even if you did, because Harald did, and there were things that they didn't tell him either. And just like a couple of weeks after that, and 2 weeks before Kennedy was there, he went to Los Alamos to check out what happened and to be briefed about it. And I just want to state something real quick. Jeff Cruikshank has been doing like a repository of all of this story and tying it all up together that includes everything that Harald talked about, Knights of Malta and everything. And it's like a book, man. I've seen that stuff, and it's incredible, the work that he's been doing. So shout out to Jeff. He's like incredible.
And
So
as well, if you join our Discord, I post all of these live links. I've just posted a link to that article from the Liberation Times. Even though Malmgren's testimony about all of this stuff is more than enough to be able to believe all of this, the Liberation Times did an incredible job with that article as well, and it gets into the nitty-gritty of it. So you should definitely, if you have time, join our Discord. You can go to the live links section and you'll be able to see it there.
And real quick, this is a great opportunity to mention, if you haven't already become a subscriber, please subscribe to the channel. It really does help. It's the easiest, best way to help us continue to do what we're doing. We just want to continue to grow and have these conversations. And that's our reason for doing this, is when you watch this stuff and flip out and you want to talk to somebody about it, and your people around you are just like, whatever, dude, I don't care. That's what we're here for. So please subscribe and come hang out with us, because it's so much fun. I feel like we should touch on the Magenta craft, because it takes us back to a starting point. Mussolini's government, the Vatican's involvement, that leads into the Knights of Malta thing. what do you guys make of the Magenta craft? 1933, Magenta, Italy. A craft is found, right? Do I have this right? It was intact.
Just yesterday, I had the two American investigators that have been looking into this for a couple of years, I think. It's Michael Armentor and Craig Oliver. Shout out to both. They've been working with Jeff jointly investigating this. And what happened was that in the 1996, an Italian researcher got a tip of documentation that had like a paper trail of Benito Mussolini's daughter being married to Benito's right hand. I think it's Ciano, his last name, Galeazzo Ciano, I think. And this guy is the one who was keeping all of the telegrams and all of the documentation that proved he was in league with Alan Dulles. And they were the ones that, when the war ended, this craft was recovered by the Americans and taken to the U.S. But yeah, they even showed me a memo from Il Duce himself saying that whoever was essentially the same thing that happened in Roswell with the press. They silenced everyone and they threatened everyone to the maximum penalty if they said anything about the Magenta crash.
And if I remember correctly, he says that the Magenta response was the template that they used for Roswell. The way that they identified, they contained the site, they arrested everybody who saw something, they separated everybody, they gave them a different story, they threatened to punish the press, they did all these things, a checklist to cover up this craft retrieval. And then later, when the Roswell incident takes place, it's like they reached into the drawer and they were like, oh yeah, we have to sanitize this whole thing, and they went down the same checklist, which was really fascinating. So they get this craft in 1933, according to Malmgren. That's legit. It goes through the Catholic Church. It's transferred to the United States. The
Pope was aware, by the way. The Pope was a part of it.
The Pope was a part of it. And at one time, Hitler and Mussolini were like, does this belong to you? No, I thought it was yours. Well, let's work on it together and let's figure it out. And they had this whole pact until I think it was 1945 when it was Operation, what did they call it? It was like McGregor. Had some kind of kick-ass name. It was like Charles Bronson.
They didn't want to talk about it, Craig and Michael, on the show because they're apparently releasing something about Operation McGregor over the next couple of months or something. And some of the stuff they're releasing, it's like never before seen stuff. So dude, I didn't push.
Just Operation McGregor by itself is like you could make a whole movie out of that. It's like, what was it? It was the Office of Strategic Services, the precursor to the Central Intelligence Agency, leads a clandestine commando raid into northern Italy to retrieve a UFO that Mussolini captured during World War II and was trying to pass over to the Germans. Are you fucking kidding me?
Do you know how crazy we sound? We sound insane.
That's my point.
I think this is why I'm so excited, because this is the first time where it's like we are actually living in a Dan Brown novel, and it's kind of being confirmed that we are. And it's even now when they're talking about the Knights of Malta, what? Pardon my French. What the fuck kind of name is that for
this is Indiana Jones
group that looks
Indiana
after
Jones.
the secrecy of UFO technology and the NHI presence on Earth, and they're called the Knights of Malta, and it's just like it becomes part of a novel that I'm all of a sudden part of, and that's why I'm excited, and it's still so hard to believe. It would still be unbelievable had it not been Harald Malmgren that has said it, released on Jesse Michaels' interview in the last 48 hours. And that's why this is so amazing. It really is.
It should be huge news. I don't know. Well, I know why it's not, but it should be huge news. I mean, this is up there. I mean, okay, so let's carry this through line through. They get their hands on this craft. OSS sends in this commando team of Charles Bronson and Robert Redford and
Steven Seagal.
fucking Steven Seagal and Clint Eastwood.
Operation MacGruber.
MacGruber. Oh God, it's just so cool. I would love to see this movie. They get the craft, they bring it back. It goes to Wright-Patterson, where they store it and start looking at it and working on it. And who do they put on this task? The fucking Nazi scientists that they bring in from Operation Paperclip. They fucking fly these guys out there, set them up at Wright-Patterson. Now they're working on a craft. It's 1933, they get the craft. 1945, they've got it back there. They're working on it. By 1946. 1947, Roswell happens. They've already got a playbook for how to deal with all this shit. Then they get the craft and they start to figure out. He says that there was a interview that he saw with his own eyes that was recorded with one of the beings. Does he not?
The sole survivor of the Roswell crash is what he said off camera to his daughter, which I think we all wish so bad was on camera. But that's the claim.
Wow.
And that's also that being, or maybe I think it was that being that gave them the idea of how to shoot things out of the sky, about how to take craft down with EMPs.
So fucking buckle your safety belts, people.
Little turncoat alien.
Oh my God.
The whole of Operation, what was it called? Operation Dominic was actually designed to specifically shoot down UAP.
Yes, that's the tie-in later, is that really was what it was from the beginning.
Then, so they figure out, he claims he sees this footage of an interview with the sole surviving biologic from the Roswell crash. During that interview, information is telepathically communicated. Stay with me, people at home. This is all real, apparently. Communicated to the people holding this being how to actually take down these craft. Why, you may ask? Because apparently, according to Dr. Harald Malmgren, at least they were told, or it was suggested, that we are part of some kind of interstellar, intergalactic conflict. And there are multiple groups involved. And this being wanted us to know that there is a way to take these craft out. And therefore, Harald Malmgren is tasked with the assignment of doing a cost assessment of what it would take to actually build the program you would use to shoot down craft and create a strategic deterrent. And that is what they're doing with Operation Dominic and Starfish Prime, which was sold to Congress as a strategic defense initiative against the Soviets, but was actually a UFO shoot-down program.
And who would have thought, by the way, that we've learned a lot in the recent years about this term of baiting UFOs, and the fact that actually started in the 60s is crazy. I thought that was more of like, I don't know, 80s, 90s, 2000s, the idea of like how to draw them in, but they've had it since the early 60s, this baiting idea.
And it works. It continues to work.
Yeah.
They bait them and then they can shoot them down. So how many times, I mean, if you knew that every time you sent someone in to investigate XYZ, you send someone down to the basement, they don't come back. How many people do you keep sending down the basement? You know what I mean?
Or does it matter?
Yeah, they may not care. Yeah, sure.
And also, another thing that I want to point out about Dulles is that he's like the OG spook. He's tied to everything from the very beginning.
So much throughout this interview.
And he, when Kennedy came in, he took Dulles out of the picture. And in the interview, Harold kind of insinuates that Dulles may have been guilty or involved in the assassination too. So
remind people who Dulles is, by the way.
Alan Dulles is a former CIA director who actually was in Malta since he was young. In Magenta since he was young. And he was the direct contact with the fascist regime in Italy. And he was the one who was like overseeing the transfer of the Magenta crash to the US. And then he was also involved in pretty much everything else from the Secret Keepers until he died, I guess.
Was Dulles the one that Malmgren says he was in Malta because he was outside of the reach of the legal system of the United States? So he could do all this really dastardly, devious bastard.
I'm not positive about that, but it could be, yeah.
He was like the guy that did all the
He was a loose cannon. He was a loose cannon, yeah.
Loose cannon. Adam Durden says Magenta crash shows that we cracked at least some of this tech long ago. Vatican was so worried the Axis powers would use it, they moved it to America.
Pope Pius the 12th was the one who blew the whistle on them, and he was the one who alerted the Americans. So yeah,
That's just so mind blowing.
yeah.
When you think about it, really, like that's astounding.
We're not even past the first hour. This is hour one.
And this is also around the time when he talks about handling the debris at Los Alamos, right? Is that where the debris was?
Yeah.
And which craft was the debris he was handling?
He didn't specify. He just said that he was presented with some materials that seemed heavy, and he touched them, and he got some kind of communication when he touched them, which reminds me of Chris Bledsoe when he was shown something and he touched it, and they were just looking at him to see the reaction that he would get. It's the same thing, essentially.
It's the same thing they did to Chris Bledsoe.
Yeah.
Yep.
That Taylor did to Chris
You just
Bledsoe. He
connected
gave
that dot for me. I hadn't gone there yet in my mind, but now I'm there. So
and he
Yeah,
hands him the
exactly.
thing, and he touches it, and it reacts to Chris Bledsoe, and then he goes, "You? Why you? Why is it? Why? What's so special about you?" And he's like all discombobulated about it.
And basically, as soon as Malmgren touched the material and he heard the voice, the telepathic voice, got the download, that was basically the approval for him to get the full read in to the program, is what it sounded like.
Yeah.
That was the test.
That's how I read it. Yeah.
From
you hear
Bissell.
this, you're in. Yep.
These timestamps you've sent me, Clint. I have some CIA briefing timestamps. Is this what we're talking about right now?
We probably are. Let's. Do you want to kick to a couple
check it
clips
out.
real quick?
Yeah, sure. Just
Real,
give me
real
a-
quick before we do. There's one super chat I want to just go. This is directly for Pavel.
sure.
Pavel, this is for you. Cole Watkins, longtime listener, first time caller. Pavel, what are the odds that NHI played some part in the origins of World War II?
Oh man, this is what I was talking about yesterday with Craig and Michael. If all of this is true about the Magenta crash and all the connections, essentially they were insinuating that World War II was actually because they were fighting over the tech that was recovered. So presumably,
What's the German craft? What's it called?
The Die Glock. Yeah.
the Glocka. Yeah,
The bell.
yeah.
You know, it's interesting data point. Just interesting data point. I'm not making a connection here. I'm just suggesting that there could be one. Dan Burrish talked about the first Gulf War in 1991-92, going into Iraq to get technology that was stored in Saddam's facilities. That he had some Sumerian ancient shit that was like locked up.
Oh, the ancient tech rabbit hole goes deep. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, was I playing that out loud? My bad.
Yes, Xander, how rude.
Well, let's
Bad
do this. Let's just take a look at a clip,
Bad
and
producing.
the first one, whatever you have pulled up, Xander. Well, let's just look at one so people can see what we're talking about. Like,
Yeah, sure. Here we go.
If you read the Three Body Problem by this amazing Chinese science fiction trilogy,
I saw the movie.
yeah, it seems like something like that is almost the case according to Richard Bissell. Wow.
Yeah.
And so what does he
Yep.
say? So he briefs you on quote unquote other world technologies. That to me belies almost human knowledge of these technologies, not just like these things are randomly showing up when we're making advanced technology.
He said, this is real. We don't know these phenomena. Also, we don't know what the Russians and Chinese and anyone else knows. That itself is threatening. Now, at that time, China was not as threatening to us as Russia. We always overrated Russia, in my judgment, and we underrated the Chinese obsession to focus in on something very specific, which was the technology race. But anyway, he just wanted me to know that there were all these conflicting forces of power in play, and that they had influence on leadership in many countries, not just Washington. And it tends to run deep into local politics, depending on where the interests were. Now, he didn't mention Arkansas, but when I reflect back, it probably was on his mind.
Why am I not on the front page of the paper at Ryan Airport or any other airport with a load of dope, with a load of guns?
Did Richard Bissell know what was going on all along? That the bluegill test was actually always intended to be a directed energy-based UFO shootdown? Well, tellingly, Harald told Pippa on his deathbed and off-air that the CIA and Atomic Energy Commission got the very idea of shooting down UFOs with directed energy from an extraterrestrial being that survived the Roswell crash in 1947.
Jesus.
I mean, come on.
Come on.
What? Come on.
What?
Come on, guys. Come on.
I can't.
I don't know if anybody else has pointed this out yet, but are we all having a bad hair day?
Yes.
A little bit. I need a haircut.
Every day it's a bad
I'm
hair
45. Things suck up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but think about what he just said. I mean, really, think about what he just said. That's amazing.
It's
First time I've
amazing.
heard that. First time.
Absolutely.
So he
incredible.
goes. I just want to tease this out a little bit. He goes on later in the interview to tease this idea out more fully. He basically says that the early phase of the UFO shootdown program started out as Starfish Prime, and then later morphs into Ronald Reagan's SDI, Strategic Defense Initiative, aka Star Wars, which was a constellation of satellites tracking objects in and around the Earth orbit and shooting down, ostensibly, Soviet warheads. If they took off and they went into space and then they were going to come back down, SDI was supposed to intercept those before they could do so. But it turned, and I remember being a kid and watching Reagan on TV, and Dan, I'm sure you remember, and
Yep.
Xander, you probably just missed that, but it was like, this was a real thing. And then that was always intended to be a UFO shootdown weapon. So the Immaculate Constellation that later we find out this thing called Immaculate Constellation, I think Harald suggests in this interview that that's what that was, right?
Yeah.
I hadn't put that together, but yeah.
And the videos that they must have taken of all of those events, I guess that's what the data is and what's being hidden, and what's we can't have access to because it's classified. But yeah, I made that connection too.
So the connection that I made is that maybe the Immaculate Constellation was an offshoot of the idea that you could put a bunch of satellites in space. And I know there was this whole, let's not put weapons in space kind of thing. And maybe they adhered to that. But instead, given the knowledge that they have after Starfish Prime, let's stick a bunch of cameras in space. And if you even if you have 3 in space at the right time, you can get a 3-point data on all of this stuff that we don't understand. So that's my impression, is that Immaculate Constellation is probably a technological offshoot of all of that, and it is effectively a constellation there as to form a shell around the Earth to basically gather as much data as we can possibly get on anything that we don't know of around the planet.
So this brings up a really interesting question that I don't think they touched on in this interview, and if they did, someone tell me where I can find it. the famous Jimmy Carter story is that Jimmy Carter did get a briefing on this, and then he was later seen crying in the Oval Office by himself after he absorbed whatever was in the briefing. And it was interesting to hear the way that Dr. Malmgren framed this whole conversation about, or this whole situation. He was basically saying, like, as far as we can tell, at least as far as the group that he's associated with can tell, we're part of some kind of a multi-party conflict, and we need to know how to defend ourselves. That's what I got from it. And so some of these beings are telling us, like, this is how you do it. If you need to shoot down a craft, like, this is the way that you can. Our technology is vulnerable. This is the chink in the armor. So some being passed that information on, and then our military industrial complex ran with that for the next 70 years. And that brings us up to present day. And we've been shooting these things down and doing all kinds of shit with them since. Oh, and psychic shit is real. And you can touch a piece of metal and you can get a download.
Yeah.
I want to also go ahead, Pablo. Go ahead.
That's the general story that is also being talked about in remote viewing groups and all that stuff, that we're part of some kind of a conflict. I still have my reservations about some of that stuff because I've gotten to know that some people within those communities, because it's not regulated in any way.
Yeah.
There's a lot of people that are either confused, they think they're having some kind of communication, or just LARPing, just flat out LARPing. So it gets really confusing there. But the general story that keeps going around, has been going around for decades, is that, yeah, there is some kind of a conflict that we're involved in the middle of.
A proxy war that involves, okay, so now here, this is where we really go crazy.
Bring it, Clint, bring it.
If you use Dr. Harald Malmgren's interview as a foundational sort of like building block, if that's our foundation, right? If we assume that this man is beyond reproach, what he's saying is legit, and he's telling us at least a huge part of the story, enormous, then what else can we infer from what we're hearing here that may or may not connect with some other things? Like he brought the Philip Corso thread into this. That Philip Corso was stationed in Italy after World War II. His job was to go out and recover all of the technology and all the secrets that were hidden all over the place and ferret out all of these spies. And that's what he was working on. That ties that together. Starfish Prime, SDI, all these threads start to come together. It brings us up to Reagan's commentary on the floor of the United Nations, where he talks about if we were involved in if an alien threat from outside this world came to Earth, could we overcome our differences? And I think the most powerful moment, at least so far in the first 3 hours, is basically is setting up this whole conversation. And he's saying there was a moment where Kennedy realized what was going on, made the connection, and then took steps to initiate a process towards world peace and nuclear disarmament. And that's where I got teared up. And he says, like, that's what they didn't want. They shut him down.
And he was killed just a couple weeks after that was in the motion, right? Is that the timeline, correct?
There is a document that hasn't been authenticated, but yeah, essentially he sent a document like 12 days before his assassination where he asks to deliver all the documents and all the data on UFOs, unidentified flying objects.
And Malgren didn't confirm it, but he said that feels right to him. That feels correct.
Yeah, he believes that's what got him assassinated. Yeah.
Pavel, was this a short time after JFK reportedly visited Los Alamos as well?
That visit to Los Alamos, and Jeff gave me a picture of his visit to Los Alamos.
I can share that.
That happened just weeks after Blue Gill.
2 or 3 weeks.
Yeah, and Harold visited Los Alamos just a couple of weeks before Kennedy did. And this picture is from that visit to Los Alamos, according to Geoff Cruikshank.
Oh, I want one of those passes.
Didn't know about this. I don't know. This is so much new information, just from dots being connected.
I wonder has Richard Dolan responded to this interview yet?
Yes.
He did a video on it that is wonderful. You guys got to see that.
He was as impressed, I think, as we are, actually.
It recontextualizes the last century of history in a way that is completely. It means that the timeline we're in is the fucking Star Wars timeline. Like we're in some kind of movie timeline. This is Hollywood shit.
Yeah, dude.
We're in a Steven Spielberg movie right now, and I think that's everyone's dream, right? It's to find yourself inside of a Steven Spielberg movie at one point, depending on what the movie is. But he,
if it's War of the Worlds, I don't want to be in it, bro.
Yeah, fuck that
Yeah,
shit.
the ending matters here. I
well,
think.
you know what's crazy is that I thought about that when he says Kennedy realized he knew what was going on. He understood the situation, and he said, "Look, we are better off working together than we are being enemies. Let's start the conversation. Let's turn off all our nuclear weapons. Let's work together on this thing, and we can have a whole different world. We can have we could start to build a Star Trek world. I guess it's probably the closest thing you could use to compare it to. But work towards using technology for the benefit of humanity instead of military conflict." And they killed him for it. They fucking killed him for it. Which means that we are in the shitty timeline.
Yeah.
There's another timeline where they did it.
It was that Malgren. I don't have a timestamp for this, but realistically, everyone that hasn't seen this interview needs to watch the whole thing in full, probably more than once. I plan to start watching it again from the beginning tomorrow.
We should have a watch party for it. Just play it through.
That.
I watched it twice so far. I'll go again.
Malgren is just straight up asked by Jesse Michaels, do you think JFK's assassination is as a result of the whole UAP problem? And Malgren, this incredibly historical figure, just straight up says, yeah.
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 Yes, and I think it was the number one reason is what he said.
Yeah, that's what he said. Yeah.
What?
That's
Is the number
the
one
JFK
reason.
files came out as well, isn't it?
Xander, there's a clip called Peace Vision is 22812 is the timestamp. Can you see if I think this is the clip.
22812.
It might be a few seconds before
Yeah,
this
no,
starts.
Here we go.
Something quite profound, because we won't even ask the question, why are we shooting at something that we don't understand and might represent intelligence of some kind?
Maybe they're sort of waiting. There's one of my favorite quotes, Eden Philpotts. It's like, the world is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to get sharper.
Totally.
And there's something about this bi-directional, if we ascend to a certain level, maybe we can have communion with these things, but it doesn't really make sense for them to show themselves to us until then.
Again, regardless of whether it is real, since we can't identify it, what I find, again, interesting to observe is the level of fear that exists, and particularly in that official circles and amongst militaries, because of the lack of control, that it must be dangerous, it must be a threat. And you will often hear the discussion of, there's this thing in our airspace. And I'm like, what if we're in its airspace?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. That's just a creative way of thinking.
Yeah.
What's the definition of airspace in a world where we have a James Webb telescope that is literally millions of miles away?
Yeah.
We're probably in a lot of other airspaces that
Xander,
we
can
can't
you
even
back
identify.
it up to, I'm sorry, 220
So
or
it's
219? There's a chapter called JFK's Push, which is at like 219. And I think this is the one. I that was a good clip, but I don't think that was the one that.
Very likely.
That's amazing.
Wait.
Do you think that
That was the JFK
might
quote.
be real? This too written into
It's
it.
in there,
And so do we?
vice versa.
And in the 1971 SALT Treaty,
It's written into it.
it's that sort of same.
So right here, they're talking about the whole. If you see something in your skies that you don't understand, it might not be us. So please don't kill us with nuclear weapons immediately. We need to build that some sort of terminology into a treaty so that we don't just accidentally fire nukes at each other because we think that the other person has done it when we haven't. And
Which George Knapp has talked about for years, right?
yeah, he has, yeah.
same language is written into it.
It's in there.
And so do we think that this letter might be real, this 2005 FOIA letter? Or?
Very likely.
That's the letter that, Pavel,
Yep.
you were just talking about. Let me see if I can get that screenshot up, because it was probably a little bit before this. Here we go.
Yeah.
So this is the letter that after JFK received some knowledge about what might be going on, he sent this letter to, was it NASA?
Oh shit, James Webb, look at that.
Yes. Basically requesting all of the UFO intelligence so that he can build some sort of, bridge so that they can communicate with the Russians to avoid nuclear conflict.
That was FOIA'd, used the Freedom of Information Act to get out of the government in 2005. And it's of controversial provenance, so we should caveat that to the audience. But it's a letter from JFK to acting CIA Director John McCone after he had fired Dulles. And he's basically saying, we need to coordinate. I need all of the data on quote unquote unknowns in sensitive airspace from NASA, because we need to coordinate better with the Russians so they don't mistake these unknowns as acts of American aggression. And that he's basically saying, I need all the UFO data so I can better coordinate with the Russians and we don't end up in, some horrible, bomb out scenario due to the UFOs.
How do we deconflict?
How do we deconflict?
How do we create a regime for deconfliction so that we don't inadvertently fire and it's not the Russians or vice versa?
And in the 1971 SALT Treaty,
it's written into it.
It's that sort of same language is written into it.
It's in there.
And so do we think that this letter might be real, this 2005 FOIA letter? Or?
Very likely.
That's amazing. Do you think that UFOs played any sort of part in JFK's death?
This is pure speculation until we see. But do I think so? Yes. I think it was probably the number one issue.
Why do you think that?
That's wild.
Because from what I've read, not what I know, because I don't know anything about the actual documents sent by JFK to Khrushchev. But what I've read is that he wanted to talk openly about the UAP phenomenon and the basis for why don't we stop fighting with each other and join forces and make peace.
And he also wanted to reduce the nuclear arsenal on both sides.
Yeah.
Yes.
God damn.
That is so awesome.
Phenomenal.
It actually, but it makes me sad because what an opportunity to do the right thing that once again we just bumbled.
Oh, totally. I just, but the balls of the leadership balls that it takes to go, you know what? Let's just not do this.
Yeah.
Like we don't have to do this. We don't have to do this. There's no reason. And there's everything to gain from working together. So why don't we just figure out a way to do that? And they were like, nope, can't have that.
No. And we're going to kill you. So nice try, bud.
What was driving them? Was it like, because I keep wondering this, was it just conflict proliferation? Was it some kind of something they knew that the rest of the population didn't know? And those documents, those communications between Khrushchev and JFK, those are presumably part of the documents that haven't been released, and maybe we will never see them, right?
I think the movie Dr. Strangelove, which he references in this interview, he cuts to a clip somewhere in there, goes a long way to explaining, for me anyway, like what kind of thinking goes on in these military circles. And you have these guys who are like, their whole career is like from before high school, they want to go to West Point, and then they go to West Point and they get their commission, and then they serve in the military for like 40 years. And they rise up to the top level brass, and they're in positions of real power, and they're in charge of all the weapons and everything. And they have a way of thinking about the world that involves, bad guys and there's deception and you can't trust the other guy, and you have to be, that's your job, is to be that paranoid. And so they can't break free from that type of thinking. And their concept is like, it's all a trick. It's always a trick, or there's some kind of, that's kind of how I'm reading it. And it was like, there was a faction that said, no, we're not going to do that. We're the power structure as it is set up in a way that we're happy with. So we're going to leave it the way it is.
I think you're right.
And we had, well, it was Curtis LeMay, wasn't it, that he basically had to talk down from the brink of world destruction.
Yep.
And LeMay just kept talking about, I've got my, their morale's really high, and I keep taking them to the point of no return, and they keep having to turn back. And it was just like, LeMay kind of alluded to the idea that, I've promised my boys some action.
It's that fucking trivial. Wasn't that crazy?
And that's it. Somebody else mentioned the idea that maybe 20 million will die.
That's the scene from Strangelove. He's like 10, 20 million tops, and like, we got this. We can win this war in a day. And and then they point out that Malmgren goes on to say, like, okay, if you drop nuclear weapons on Moscow, great. Let's say you cut the head off of Moscow. The Soviet Union is in disarray. Who are you going to talk to when you need to talk them down and get a surrender? You're going to have all these generals, all these admirals, all these nuclear weapons all over the Soviet Union, and everyone's going to be running on their own program. And that's the movie. I just want to throw this last thing in. The movie Failsafe that I talked about on Wednesday, and I mentioned it a few times. It's free on YouTube if you get a chance to watch it. It's like the other movie that came out the year Doctor Strangelove came out. And Doctor Strangelove is the one that blew up. But Failsafe is about the training that these guys went through and the military like commitment to victory. These guys are so set in this mindset of like, they train their bomber squadrons, and they explore this in the movie. To once the failsafe signal is received, they are to launch a nuclear strike on the Soviet Union, no matter what. And they go through this movie, and they're like, get the guy's wife on the phone, get the wing commander's wife on the phone, or the captain's. They bring the wives in. They're like talking to their husbands on the phone, and they're like, don't do this. This is a mistake. They bring the president. He calls them, and they're like trained to ignore every stop order. And so all the way up until the very last moment of the movie, when you find out how it ends, which is fucking crazy, they're trying to wheel it back from World War III, but they can't. And the system has a mind of its own. And one of the things that jumps out at me about Harald Malmgren is, as a systems thinker, he talks around it. He's like, our systems are set up for failure. With this issue, they're set up to, they're too siloed. We omit an entire way of thinking about the world that the Chinese and Indians did not omit. And they could be making progress on this stuff because we are too tunnel vision on the weapons applications. We're missing the bigger picture here. And anyway, I'm sorry, Xander, I just totally talked over you, but I just wanted to point that out. That movie is awesome. If you're trying to get a sense of like the zeitgeist of the time, Strangelove and Failsafe.
He was completely right. Malgren was completely right, because both the Americans, as you just said, and the Russians had their own system set up. The Russians themselves prevented World War III. They prevented nuclear holocaust because their submarines, which launched nuclear weapons, were they operated in the dark, because if you send a signal out, that's it. They know where your submarines are, and we can't have that. So the Russians had their own version of what Malgren did. The Russians, they had a sub stationed off the coast of Cuba, and it was operating in the dark, as it's supposed to do, and the US started dropping. They had a suspicion that there would be nuclear subs in the area, so they started dropping, I think it was depth charges, and this nuclear sub had to make the decision because they couldn't communicate. They thought they were under attack, and 2 out of the 3 people required to launch nuclear weapons said, yes, let's launch nuclear weapons. And it was that 1/3 person, I think is, what's his name? I may have his name here. I can't pronounce his name, it's Russian. Arkhipov, maybe it's that. He said no, and that's the reason the world exists. One person said no, and Malgren said no. And the Russians have their own version of this.
There is a fucking awesome movie called Crimson Tide with Denzel Washington and Gene Hackman. And if you guys want to see a scene where this scenario plays out on an American nuclear submarine, they have this like command decision they've got to make, and it's the CO and the captain, and they're like, they get a partial go order for a nuclear launch, and then it's like this whole movie about like, do we do it or do we not do it? And you see both sides, like they play it out on both sides, and you're like, it's the system is the problem. This training is so good. These guys are so good at what they do. It's really once the dominoes start to fall, it's off to the races, and it really does boil down to like the guy at the very end, does he push the button or not? And it's like we've almost lost everything. How many times? 2 that we can say right now, maybe 10, maybe 100.
Words out of my mouth.
About. Yeah.
I was just thinking, how many times have we avoided this that we have no idea about all over the world? Who knows?
And you also got to count the times when UFOs were involved in nuclear weapons. When, I think it was in Montana that instance, and there was another incident in Russia where
they turned them on.
Turned them on, and it was like,
and started
how
the
many
countdown,
times
right?
That happened, yeah.
I mean, think about the idea of what Starfish Prime was trying to basically figure out, like an EMP or an X-ray burst in the atmosphere is capable of knocking out at least one, probably more, UAP or UFOs. So we know that's a real weapon that they know it works. So they're definitely going to reserve that. We know that the Strategic Defense Initiative was a multi-billion-dollar, multi-decade plan to put a defense system in space. That was real. They spent real money on that. That's what bankrupted the Soviet Union. There's no reason to think they ever stopped. We know that Jeff Bezos' grandfather is now tied into this story because he was one of the guys looking at some of the early technology, right? He's somehow tied in.
As
I think
Donald
he
Trump's
owned
uncle.
property where stuff was stored. I think that was it.
Malmgren said that Bezos' grandfather was involved in reverse engineering in some form or another.
Like, it's crazy to me that at the same time it can be true that everyone in the world agrees that nuclear weapons are ridiculous. There's no purpose. Like it's so counterproductive, and at the same, and no one wants to die in a nuclear holocaust, and no one wants to start one. Yet we have all these nuclear weapons, and then you bring in, what was it in Strangelove where they talk about the Doomsday weapons? They're like, oh, and even if you do lose the war, we've buried nuclear weapons all around the planet. And these are gigantic, what were they, super weapons, Doomsday weapons. They're set to go off no matter what if they don't get a stop signal every like couple of days. And then so if you were to wipe out the Soviet Union or Russia, for example, or the United States maybe, then like 30 days later a Doomsday weapon goes off and makes all the oceans on the planet poison or something.
That's
like
not
this
real,
shit
right?
is real. They've got all this stuff. This is real.
Whoa.
That's the timeline we're in.
I didn't know about that. That's wild.
I don't
didn't
like
know
that
the
one
details, but I heard that, yeah, effectively, to be honest, I live in the Western world. Like I live in the UK. I probably receive the propaganda I'm sent, but I'm under the impression that the Russian protocol for nuclear Armageddon is every day I will tell you not to launch them, and if I don't tell you, then you launch them. Who knows whether that's true or not? I don't know personally. I don't have a direct line. Having said that, Malgren, you've probably not got to this point yet, Clint. And again, everyone needs to get to this. Watch the entire thing. Malgren in hospital to Jesse Michaels said, you know, if I want to ring, he said basically, all these back channels, it's like a separate whole functionality of government. You have your established channels, which involve diplomacy, official diplomacy, but everyone uses the back channels for anything important because otherwise you're going to get eyes on it.
Basically, that's where it really gets done.
Everything gets done there. Anything the president needs to do that's important needs to be done via a back channel because otherwise, in the time that it takes to send a message from, let's say, the US to Russia or US to Japan, 50 eyes are going to get seen on it. And sometimes you can't have that. So in hospital, Malgren just straight up said to Jesse, look, I can call Vladimir Putin right now, and I can get through to him.
In the moment.
He said he has a direct line to Vlad Putin.
Yep. And they've spoken about nuclear at least once.
Yeah.
During dinner.
Tell me more. Tell me about this whole Putin
this gets
thing.
into
Let's go.
This gets into the whole how important Malgren is to the Russians, because Malgren's uncle apparently was a Russian chess master.
Chess
Yeah.
master.
Am I interpreting that right?
That's correct.
A champion. Yeah.
And he has
And
the same
highly
name.
respected in the Russian intelligence community because he was a genius.
And he has exactly the same name. So that, for some reason, I'm not going to judge, gives him some sort of like status. So
Bloodline. They said bloodline.
yeah, bloodline, right? So at any time he's communicated with Russia, he's kind of given priority because of his uncle. So like he was invited to the Russian ballet with Kissinger, and they were also invited to stay in the Tsar's special box that he always stays in. And Kissinger went to sit down in the Tsar's chair, and he said, no, that's for Malmgren. You're gonna.
And Kissinger was
gonna
pissed.
Sit. And Kissinger lost his shit, basically, because Kissinger was the most senior person on that trip. But no, Malmgren was given it. And that happened on multiple occasions, to the point where Malgren was introduced to Putin. Putin was the mayor of some... I don't know much about Russian history. He was a mayor or something like that at the time, so he wasn't important.
In the 90s, I think, right?
Yeah, but they knew he was going to be important, so they introduced him before he became the leader of Russia. And given Malgren's knowledge of game theory and things like that, he's ended up writing some essays about Russian game theory and things like that Putin has literally respected. So, I think he was in the process of writing another, which is why he had a direct line to Putin. But this is somebody who's, I don't know how old he was at the end of, in this interview, in his 80s, with a direct line to Putin, and
89.
nobody in the US knows about this. Yeah.
Yep.
And this is a back channel. and it's one of the most important back channels you can have, especially at the moment with all the conflict going on.
Well, didn't he kind of allude to the fact that back channels are becoming less and less of a thing?
Yes, he did.
Right? Which is bad. Which is a bad thing.
Yeah. It's horrible.
Yeah.
It's interesting to compare and contrast the level of intellect and the educational pedigree that these people have that worked at this level. I'm talking about, of course, Malgren and Kissinger and others at that level, right? And I don't want to start a shitstorm, but like when you look at the current administration, you want to look at the previous administration too. Like our American administrations are kind of a joke. Mm-hmm. Like we're fucking clowns compared to what the level of strategic thinking at the highest levels that was happening with Malmgren and I'm sure Putin and the other advisors. It makes one really frustrated, I think. It certainly makes me frustrated to think that like we live in such an unstable world and there are so many total fucking dickheads in charge of all of the most important shit. And it's painful to know that at one time, the top thinkers in the world, the top leaders were sitting down at a table or more or less, or trying to have a conversation about how could we turn all this off? What if we just made world peace? Like, let's just make that decision and put our combined resources into it. What could we accomplish? And it's fucking frustrating because you look around and the whole world's constantly on the brink of catastrophe now. And it makes you think, yeah, Stephen Greer is right. There's something to what he's saying. The lost century is a real thing.
Yeah.
And we're in the hands of fucking madmen and psychopaths.
And I can't help but think we don't have someone like Malmgren now. I can't imagine there's an equivalent now or someone as brilliant as he was.
We don't know.
True. That's true.
If that person exists, we don't know who he is or she.
Well, Malmgren said in the beginning of this, sorry, Pavel, to jump on this, but he said Matt Pines really blew him away. He's like, Matt Pines is a smart kid.
Yeah.
I should point out, somebody asked in the chat for some of the articles that Malgren wrote about Putin. I've just posted in the live links section of our Discord. So if you join our Discord, you can get Malgren's articles about Vladimir Putin, which apparently Putin read and, as I said, respected, and was the reason why, he was able to just call up Putin. Which is
and something that I think it's worth pointing out about those pieces he wrote is that Malmgren didn't necessarily praise or criticize Putin. He was just trying to get into his mind and understand what how he saw nuclear energy and nuclear weapons, and the fact that he was objective about it and impartial about what he wrote. That's what made Putin look his way, and that's what made him become more interested in it. You know, it wasn't because there's a lot of people that think that this was like a flex or like support to Russia. It wasn't. He was just being impartial about the whole thing and trying to get to an understanding of how Putin's mind worked. You know,
it's interesting. The Russia angle or the Russian thing is interesting to me because I agree with you, Xander. Like, we have grown up inside a bubble of Western propaganda. Like, there's no question that we're inside a bubble of Western propaganda. It's just hard when you're in it to see where it starts and stops and to understand like the scope of it. And so I think, like, as someone who accepts that as a reality, it makes it's interesting to think about Russia because there's so little that is actually taught about it that we really know. And a lot of people, especially in the States, are just sort of ignorant about what is happening with the Russian people.
And
it's like Europe, and then
to
there's
say
like
the same
just
thing
a
as
black hole.
And indoctrinated too, because people
Yeah.
grow up in schools learning that Russia is the big bad villain. And yes, they do a lot of horrible shit. They do. But it's like, it's only very one-sided, you know?
I mean, we are kids of Rocky IV, where we're taught that, you know, Ivan Drago. I mean, really, in a way, that's kind of part of it. You know, from the time I was a kid, I did think like, oh, Russians, they're the enemy. They're all these big blonde bad. They're all, you know, they're the enemy, and that comes from stuff like that on purpose.
G.I. Joe.
There you
the
go.
whole fucking G.I. Joe thing was built on that. All of the stuff. That's the thing, is like American cartoons in the 1980s were based on like toy lines that were built around these ideas of like what America was supposed to be, the story we told ourselves after World War II, and like this global exceptionalism. And then, you know, in adulthood, we go on to find out like, oh no, we do a lot of dark shit. We've always done some of the darkest shit. We're probably some of the best at it. And we just have a better PR team for, you know, like the shit that we do around the world. And it's interesting because the limitations of the American education system are obvious and apparent, but without someone to talk to, I don't have a lot of like European friends or Russian friends I could chit chat with to get like perspective on this. So it's interesting. I feel like we're left in the dark.
I
about
can't
a lot
remember
of thinking.
if Malgren said that this is advice that he gave directly to Putin, or that it was advice that he wanted to give to Putin, but he was under the impression that Putin wanted some advice, basically what to do on the American perception of him. And Malgren's advice was just go on Good Morning America for 10 minutes. Just call them up and say, I'm President Putin, and talk to them for 10 minutes and let the American people just get some sort of direct image of you that isn't filtered through all of the foreign policy that the Americans have, and let the American people decide. And that, for me, is again, it's sort of an echo of what JFK was trying to do, where it's just building a bridge. It's like, okay, maybe we're all kind of a lot closer and a lot more similar than we think we are. So let's just show each other who we are. For even 10 minutes might be enough to just like
bring the temperature down.
down
I
the
think,
temperature. Yes, exactly right.
Yeah.
Well,
Totally true.
you can't win a nuclear conflict what is that T-shirt from the 80s? You can't hug with nuclear arms. Remember that?
No, but I love it.
You haven't seen that? That was like
No.
oh.
I find one now.
So sure, and it was like this. It was like you can't hug with nuclear arms. Anti-nuclear. But Danny Sheehan talked about this, and Jim Garrison talked about this. They were a big part of the denuclearization push in the 90s and late 80s and early mid 90s. And Sheehan once said, I think it was the one I talked to him that one time, and he said one of the things that the people in control of the situation are afraid of is that the perception publicly would change that humans have one origin story, not the origin story of your independent nation state. You know, it's like that we would suddenly get on this peace kick, and they're really worried that idea would catch on. And so they're trying to like shut that down. And it feels like that's what this faction is pushing for. It's like, let's let everybody know where we're at.
Yeah, and they also are going out of their way to prevent us from remembering a lot of the stuff that we've forgotten as a civilization, as humans. And that's been happening also for, I would say, millennia, since the first control systems came about, you know?
Well, he made Pavel, can you talk about he made a great point about Indian research, Chinese research, the way that they look at the phenomenon versus the way that we look at it. And it kind of dovetails nicely into your world.
It has to do with a dogmatic kind of approach to look at things, and not necessarily religious, but here in the US and in the Western world, there's this idea that if we find out what this is, it has some kind of negative spiritual connotation to it, or even in science, there's a dogmatic way of looking at things on this side of the pond. That's why, for example, and sorry to bring this up, but it kind of ties into it. The Nazca mummies here are really ignored. And for example, in Russia, they're already doing stuff scientifically to get on this, you know, to get on it and to know what's going on. And it has to do with that. And in China and in Russia, they don't have that constraint. They understand that they have to look at all of the angles and look at all of the data and not dismiss absolutely anything. And here, that's what people do. They dismiss it because there is a dogma, there is a stigma that is still persist to this day.
It's called the Cartesian model, isn't it? It's the point of, and Malgren talks about this, I think, at length. It's the separation of like the physical and the mind. Let's say like what the mind thinks it knows versus what we observe in reality, and that those need to be separated, and that's indeed what the Western world has done. But the Russian traditions and the Chinese traditions haven't done that, and thus might be the reason why the Chinese and the Russians could actually leapfrog over the progress that the US may have made with the UAP subject, purely because they aren't locked into the thought that that the mind, the science of the mind must be treated differently to the science of the nuts and bolts. We talked about last year, like everything's moved from nuts and bolts to psionics and stuff. Maybe that's not weird. Maybe that's not weird in Russia. Maybe that's not weird in China. I don't know. I've never been to either country, but it's definitely weird for us. And Reddit was on fire for a good few months about the idea.
I heard Matt Pines talking about this, and he was like, in China and Russia, whenever somebody approaches the government with an idea about something to do with psychics and or ESP, they fund the projects if they find them credible. And
like what we call paranormal is just part of the reality fabric.
Just science. Just science.
Yeah.
And here it's like just a few $1 million and not a lot of research out in the open, because I am one of the people who believe that there's a lot that's been done in the dark about this here in the US.
Sure, of course. I mean, there's a... Xander, if you could jump to... Where is it here?
Are we about to talk about when Malgren talks about science being classified?
Classified math, 250, 234. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. I have
Yes.
this literally queued up. We're right.
Oh,
we're
look at
in
that.
sync.
I love you.
So there's 2 clips I want to show here, if that's all right with the owner of this channel, Clint.
Of course, go right ahead, guys.
So I'll play the first clip, and then I have a second clip to sort of add context to that.
Clint may not have been here. You may not have seen this part yet, Clint. This
I
is
might
like
not have.
He may
What,
not know.
what's the timestamp? 2:20 something.
We're an hour away.
2:52,
An hour away
34.
from the end.
Yeah.
Okay,
Classified
that's
math.
about where I'm at.
Cool.
Let's do it.
This is verbatim. This is we classified whole entire areas of physics in the nuclear era and made them state secrets, like of the like theoretical
Physics,
science of physics.
And they're like, wait, what?
So like what? Yeah,
Yeah.
like physics is supposed to be open source.
And so you start to wonder, is Eric Weinstein right that physics went down a certain road because there was a wall?
Yes.
And now the weight of new innovations is crushing that wall.
Well, that brings, another Explain That Tweet series. So we have, Harold, you wrote, questions appearing regarding successor to AEC. AEC is the Atomic Energy Commission.
Right.
Department of Energy now oversees all national labs, including nuke research and security. National labs also include advanced research on other potential security threats, such as biotech, all subject to DOE, Department of Energy, R&D classifications. So are you saying here that our most advanced science is not occurring in the labs or hallways of MIT, Harvard, Stanford, but in fact at these DOE research facilities?
yes.
Dude,
Wow.
again, like
Casserole.
So in that clip, they actually talk about Eric Weinstein directly, because Weinstein has talked a lot about this, and there's been he gave a speech back in middle of March that apparently he wrote the night before, and I'm going to show a segment from that because it adds a little bit more context. And yeah, it's probably his best speech.
It's only like 7 minutes long, too. It's not a long.
Yeah, the whole thing from start to finish was 17 minutes long. He apparently
17.
had a plan, and then as a result of something he learned, he rewrote everything overnight and gave this speech. We're not going to play the whole thing, obviously, but we'll play the relevant segment.
So as a Jew, I'm with the Joker on this one. We've got to get out of this if we want an indefinite human future and to build something.
So right, just to add a little bit of context and a lead into this, he's talking about how does humanity basically survive into the future? Like what can we do to get rid of all of the problems that we've got related to the environment and related to climate change and all of that. So that's all the context you need to know.
Something truly fantastic. The problem is that the culmination of all human theory about the base reality stagnated abruptly and mysteriously in 1973. Imagine that physics stopped when Crocodile Rock was top of the charts. Everything we know about the physical universe at its deepest level is on this slide in front of you, and it hasn't moved. Now, recently, many of you have seen that Mark Andreessen had a meeting at the White House, and at that meeting, something fantastic was revealed. The Biden White House told him that they had stagnated deliberately fields of theoretical physics. Read that quote. It should send chills down your spine. This graph shows the youngest living Nobel laureate in...
Should we read that quote out loud?
Yeah, please.
It says,
go ahead.
they literally said, this quote, they literally said, well, during the Cold War, we classified entire areas of physics and took them out of the research community, and like entire branches of physics basically went dark and didn't proceed, and that if we decide we need to, we're going to do the same thing to the research underneath AI.
And now he's about to talk about the average age of the Nobel laureates within physics in the US.
Theory, in theoretical physics theory. That number is always below the age of 50 until this magical point where string theory enters the game as a theory of quantum gravity. And our youngest living Nobel laureate is now over the age of 70 because the field is not producing new results. This is also terrible, but it turns wonderful because if we can find the problem, we can make progress and reach the stars.
Wow.
Change AI to physics, technology to science, and startups to alternative theories in reading the following quote, and you will see what they did. They took a couple of theories, they cocooned them, string theory being preeminent among them, and they said all competitor theories will die, and in the field of physics, it's called the only game in town. You try to do something else, your career comes to an abrupt end. Whoa. Now, how do you fool the world's smartest people into a soft sunset? A soft sunset is one where you decommission something, but you don't tell the people being decommissioned that their careers are coming to an end. You get them to repeat something over and over again. Quantum gravity is the holy grail. Quantum gravity is the holy grail. All the questions center on what is the theory of quantum gravity. Quantum gravity is the holy grail of theoretical physics. You perseverate. And if you say something enough times, it becomes as if true. But if it was the Holy Grail, why is there no mention of it in the corpus of English language books before 1972, right before physics stagnated? It is because there is no theory of quantum gravity in the way that they're looking for it. Quantum gravity is safe. You can invite your Iranian and your North Korean and your Russian and your Chinese students to do quantum gravity, and nobody's going to get hurt. Now, here are my final thoughts. In November of '52, there's an error in this. We learned that Earth is our womb, not our home. We cannot stay here because we have to go. We cannot all share one atmosphere safely. The tools are too powerful. Agreed. If an indefinite human future can be restored, and I believe that it can, there is one way out, and that's physics. And Mike Lazaridis, if you're out there somewhere, thank you for building the Perimeter Institute of Theoretical Physics to do this. I'm sorry it got taken over by quantum gravity. We have to go beyond Einstein because we are simply not capable of getting to the stars if we have a speed limit set at c. Western science must lead the way. Vivek Ramaswamy is convinced that somehow China and India are pulling ahead of the West. This is not true. The greatest threat comes from France, the world's greatest mathematicians. If we are prepared to take on India and China, are we prepared to take on Paris and Marseille? I put this to you. Oh. Can I go back? Apparently you cannot.
Deep State got him.
They got him.
What I want to say is the following. We Jews have a meal that isn't really a meal, it's a survival manual. And it's the Passover Seder. And I ask you this year to find, if you're not Jewish yourself, find a Jew and get invited to a Passover Seder. It describes how we survive. And the way we do it is that at some points you have to realize that you cannot stay here and you must leave even if you feel that there is no way out. You may feel that you are backed against the Red Sea. But if you do not actually realize what time it is, you will surely perish. I believe that the end of physics is almost in sight. It may bring us wonders. It may bring us the ability to traverse the cosmos. This could be the greatest time. We have a brief period of vitality before the wars will surely start if we choose to revitalize. We must use it well, and our greatest challenges are ahead, but I think we're going to make it, and I think that the future will be amongst the stars and be glorious indeed. Thank you all very much.
Wow.
I never saw that before. I've never seen that.
One hell of a speech.
I think that what Eric is talking about here, this like disclosure of physics started happening late last year. And it happened because of a lady, Dr. Anna Brady Estevez, who's been putting together a bunch of different conversations from scientists who are sitting right now, like active in NASA, DARPA, the Department of Energy, all of these places. And she's been making them go forward and talk about their research in the open. And I've been talking about this on my channel for a while. There's one that I was invited to. I was offered the Zoom link. It was like a 9-hour presentation where a bunch of different people spoke about this. Do you guys remember this guy from the White House that said that we have stuff that can manipulate space and time?
Yes.
So this conversation that is 9 hours, they talk about that. Scientists who are working on stuff like that, they're working on materials that are superconductors that can do they claim faster than light communication. And so it's already happening, though. That's why Eric is doing these types of conferences, because he knows that it's already happening.
Oh man, so is he saying, or are you saying that there is a organized push to like put this out in the public sphere and like make this a line of discussion about like the potential future path for humanity?
What I think happened is that some other country already stumbled upon something, and they already cracked something. And I don't know if the Americans cracked it long ago. That's the debate that is going on. There's people who claim that we cracked it, Americans cracked it like in the 60s, but we don't know that for sure. But the reason that, for example, concepts like extended electrodynamics is already being talked about in open circles is because the Chinese were the first ones who started talking about it, like in conventions and places like this. And I just recently read Whitley Strieber's The Fourth Mind book, and he mentions a scientist that is talking about this in one of Dr. Ana Brady Estevez's podcasts. His name is Richard Banderick. And he is, if somebody makes an announcement that there is some kind of new way of understanding physics, he would be one of the people that I think would be making this announcement. Richard Banderick.
You know, it's interesting because this ties again. It ties so many things together, right? Like all of these weird loose ends that we have kind of been nibbling at for years now. Amy Eskridge, that famous in UFO circles YouTube interview she did before she was killed or died under mysterious circumstances. Some people say she was assassinated. She said directly that NASA had successful prototypes of anti-gravity stuff. They've got technology that can do shit that you wouldn't even believe. And they decommission it and melt it for scrap. They have a whole set of these technologies that they come in and they know they work. They've got the data on it. And she was putting together a team of was it the Frontier? I forget what the name of the organization was, of all the scientists who had worked on this stuff, which included her father, who worked for NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, the Rocket City. And they were going to try to commercialize some of this technology. And then she was found dead in her apartment. But that ties directly into all of this stuff that they're talking about now, the classified physics. It touches on the Nazi history of Huntsville, Alabama, and the Nazis who were originally brought in to start NASA, and how all these guys, even the ones that were connected to the occult, had all kinds of weird connections to this strange sort of occult background, and they were using it to develop technology. And this was all happening under cover of classified research in these weird labs. It's crazy to think how much deeper this must go.
Yeah.
There's another part in the video where Pippa Malgren, his daughter, is saying that it's at 2:58:20 if you want to pull it up, but she's saying that when you are looking for technologies that we have that have been dug up through reverse engineering, that you can look for technologies where there's no on-ramp, which is very interesting. That she was told to look for that kind of stuff. Do you have that, Xander?
Yep.
Cool. 2:58:20.
Have any evidence for that?
No, but it should be.
Okay.
And let me interject. Something that keeps coming up in conversation about this issue is I hear a lot of, Pippa, look for the technologies where there's no on-ramp. I go, what do you mean on-ramp? I mean, you can't find the research history that led to it. Those are the interesting ones to pay attention to. They're not saying it's definitely from this particular source.
They
They're
come
just
out of
saying
nowhere.
the ones that come out of nowhere, those have interesting stories.
So fascinating. And Harold, do you
was kinda
believe,
fun.
because you're interested in Townsend Brown to begin with, presumably this source gave you this information on Townsend Brown collaborating with Tesla, which If that's true, that is.
Yeah, that's it for that.
Yeah, I just thought as well. You've not.
Jesse
got to
made
that
a great point about the Tesla thing, and he was like saying how Tesla was an experimentalist and Einstein was a theoretician, and so Tesla was able to make progress that Einstein couldn't make.
Yeah. And
Right.
Harald
Hands-on.
prefers Tesla over Einstein. Harald said he thinks Tesla was a better scientist in general than Einstein. Which I thought that was really shocking to hear him say that.
We also
Because-
didn't hear the source, but Malgren said he's been told by, presumably somebody he trusts, that Townsend Brown actually worked alongside Tesla on something.
Have you
which
ever
is
watched
brand
Townsend
new.
Brown's, like those films of his experiments with the discs whipping around the thing? And they had, have you ever seen the lifters that people were building in their garages and stuff? You ever see those? There's a
the
thing
ones
called
where you get on it and
no,
that?
this is there are videos
like the wire
of
things, aren't they?
it's like balsa wood. So imagine like a couple of chopsticks and some tin foil and a few copper wires. It looks like it's nothing, right? And this is basically people were taking T. Townsend Brown's work and they were like, how do I build this in my garage? And they figured out that if you pass enough current through the right configuration of these materials, it gets vertical lift, and they just take off and they just float up in the air. And you can see this. It's called lifter experiments. Just go on DuckDuckGo and search for like anti-gravity lifter. You'll find them. The last time I looked at one was years ago. They were kind of old then, but people were working on this stuff. And supposedly they took it to NASA and they tested it in a vacuum and they did all these different things. And NASA said it doesn't work. But T. Townsend Brown, I went down a T. Townsend Brown rabbit hole years ago, and he had this whole thing about super high voltages passing through these like disc-shaped objects that would have crazy propulsion. And he had them tethered to like a power source, and they could fucking whip around this thing like crazy. And it was just like, where did this stuff go? Where did all this anti-gravity research in the 50s go? It just stopped.
So
There's
really, where
theories-
where is
there's-
it?
There's
That's what
theories
Weinstein's
that the
saying.
B2 Spirit uses T. Townsend Brown technology in some way, because I don't know who it was. I don't know the person off the top of my head. Somebody did some sort of like analysis on the aerodynamic frame based on the information that we've been given about the craft. It shouldn't be able to fly. It
shouldn't be able to take off on the short runway. I
Yeah,
think
it shouldn't be able to produce enough lift to take off or something, so that it must be using some part of technology that we don't know about in the public interest. So that's kind of almost direct evidence that at least some part of science has been classified or kept from the public.
So what do we think happens when people stumble across this information? If physics people and experts start getting close, how is it stopped, do we think?
I think that this is getting into the final part of the video territory, because there's a part there where Harald says that these people that are keeping the secret believe they're like some sort of guardians, and that they're doing it. They do have like a noble purpose or of sorts. And,
Interesting use of the word guardian, which is what the Space Force guys are called, guardians.
yeah, and if you think about it, what type of like physics or new science would garner such a reaction or like protective kind of personality? It would be something like splitting the atom, as catastrophic as that, or similar to that, or something that could mess with the timelines or something like that, you know? And if it is easy to access, just to play a little devil's advocate here, it would get out of control pretty quickly, if you ask me, especially given how many we are and how batshit crazy a lot of us are, you know? Just putting that out there, you know?
Yeah.
I've got a video of one of these lifters, and just to show you how simple this is, it's kind of crazy when you see it. So,
I think I have seen that before.
watch this when they just run power through it. It's sitting on a desk. He's got these tiny, tiny little copper wires. Watch this. They're just going to run some juice to it. Watch what happens. Here it goes.
Whoa.
It's weird that it's like locked in when it rises up. Like if you rewind like 10,
you think it would
20
just go
seconds,
crazy.
Yeah, it's like it's almost bouncing off something that isn't there.
I think it's tethered. It's like it's tethered to the power source, so it's not
but
able to.
There's a
That's what
different,
craft
like,
does.
balloons are tethered and they don't look like that when they hit the tether. It's something there, like it's almost magnetic rather than.
You know, you think it locks into a frequency and that's why it stays there?
Like that, yeah.
Well, also
So
people
people-
talk about seeing craft and how craft kind of does that sort of rock when you see it, a disc or whatever.
Yeah. The
Let me see if I can find another one. So this is not a limited thing. Like this happens. A lot of different people have built different versions of these. Here's one. And it's all running off the same principle, more or less, is that you pass super high voltages through this configuration. It creates some kind of vertical lift. They tried to, now I've heard it said that this is ionized air being pushed downwards from the device, and it's causing this upward thrust. But I think that's
Which
still
would be propulsion, kind of, right? Sort of.
kind of up in the air. But this is what we heard about a few months ago. There was a guy who formerly of NASA who said they had some electric propulsion system that they had developed that runs purely on electricity but creates thrust. And they were like, we can now lift more than the weight of the power source and the device with just electricity.
So we know ion drives exist, but they are based on what we know, incredibly, like their limits are limitless, but their output is so small that because you're firing out ions, like you're not creating much of a push-pull kind of response, but in theory it could be incredibly powerful. And I think that's what they're kind of, the mainstream science is alluding to with this kind of propulsion that we're seeing in these YouTube videos. But clearly, I think that the work of Townsend Brown, based on videos I've seen from like people like UAP Gerb and Jesse Michaels, where Townsend Brown's work eventually ended up, you'd think there's a bit more to it than just a very small amount of propulsion. And the same for the Tesla files, which Donald Trump's uncle was in charge of collecting or something.
Right. Donald Trump's uncle and Jeff Bezos' uncle are tied into this, or grandfather.
Yep.
That's weird. It's weird how the through line just runs right through today to modern military industrial complex, space exploration. And it feeds into this notion that I'm fond of, that there is a push to declassify this stuff so that they can get to the business of making money off of it and start doing stuff with it. And it feels like that's maybe what's
that
behind
is
it.
Also true. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
They know it's all real. They're like, why are we sitting on this? The Chinese are going to do it. And he says, Malmgren, I wish I knew where if you know where this clip is, that we should watch it. But Malmgren says towards the end, Pippa is talking about China specifically, and she's saying how China and India have this holistic approach to their science that we don't have. And they were like, if China were to announce that they have made contact with another race, it doesn't matter what happens the next day. The United States could come out and be like, prove it. And then it doesn't matter, because the moment they say it, all eyes, and he says this in a very dramatic way that I think was very appropriate. He goes, all eyes will turn to China. They will be the technological leader in the world. They will immediately assume a psychological position.
Superiority.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the United States will be almost like a second or third tier, whatever the fuck. No one cares, really. It's about
Which begs the question: why hasn't someone done that yet?
Maybe they're about to.
Oh boy, yeah.
I think really the leading edge to all of why this has to just happen now is because this just can't be contained much longer. Like the baseline of technological prowess is always rising, and I think we're only 70, 80 years on, less than even. Let's say we figured out this technology in the closing sort of the closing of the Second World War or something. We're not. It's only been 80 years, and maybe in those 80 years, the technological baseline for humanity has risen to the point now where it just really can't be contained. If we've got AI and the internet and all of this collaboration around the corner, can you contain this?
Well, what happens when you have sufficiently intelligent AI systems that are capable of solving this forbidden physics in a day?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like with a quantum computer and the right Chinese researchers behind it and enough funding.
And perhaps what's worse is they don't care who they solve it for.
Right.
I mean, maybe that's what it boils down to, is like the ticking time clock is like the writing is on the wall here, and it's time. It's just time. At some point, it's just people figure it out on their own, whether or not you've classified it. Knowledge wants to be free, and there will be a group that gets there first. So do you want to be that group, or do you want to let someone else be that group? And that must be at bottom what's motivating the whole disclosure conversation. According to at least what Malgren is saying or suggesting.
There's also another possibility, though, that I think we can't ignore, that humans may not be in control of the rollout of this.
Sure.
You know?
Right.
That's true. That's true. Well, then that begs the question, right? Okay, so now you've got this push for what we've kind of jokingly been calling GarageBand SETI, or like GarageBand contact ufology, punk rock ufology, where you've got people now are trying to just do it on their own, right? Like we were talking, there's a top secret project that Xander is deeply involved in. It's something that he's been the architect of for a while now, and I'm excited for everyone to know about it. But we're talking about like combining off-the-shelf technology with some basic stuff and being able to walk outside and sit down and make contact and summon a craft. What happens when 1 million people are doing that? What happens when 1 million people figure out that you can sit there and practice and develop your psychic ability, and that's real? What happens when 1 billion people figure that out? Do the NHI just go, okay, well, you've graduated, or whatever the next level of consciousness? And maybe at bottom, that's what it really is about, right? Like the consciousness that we are capable of right now is just barely able to conceive of a world where we're at peace. We're just barely having that conversation and trying to, and it's painful for us to even think about it. And maybe that's what they're talking about.
You touched on something a second ago, where what happens when 1 billion people can do this? I think those people kind of become ungovernable, because if you're connecting with something so huge and advanced, how do you then like listen to your boss really, or listen to a president? It's like, well, what look up there, dude. I'm listening to these folks. I think we're going to lose a lot of people to that.
That's a good point, man.
We will be entangled if that happens.
Yeah.
And I guess that's what does it for me. When 1 billion, that's a lot, man. Try 200 million. That would be more than enough to entangle a good amount. And yeah, just
so I've made it 1 hour and 50 into this podcast without mentioning Stephen Greer, and I'm about to mention him.
You almost made it. You almost.
We
made
were
it.
going to give you a prize if you went the whole.
I'm chopping it.
you gotta say the nickname, dude. It doesn't count if you don't.
Daddy Greer. So he has, his idea is that really humans almost maybe that 1 billion or 200 million. Maybe it's just, let's say the population of the planet is 8 billion right now. Maybe it's just 80 million. Maybe it's just 1%. And he likens it to the idea that maybe humanity, or consciousness on the whole, kind of acts a bit like a superfluid, where superfluids, to achieve a superfluidic state, you've got, whatever concoction of chemicals you have, and you heat them to, I think you cool them down to a particular degree, and there's only, it sort of starts a chain reaction where only 1% of the atoms within that fluid sort of they become coherent with each other, and as soon as that 1% is achieved, it starts a chain reaction, and the whole 100% just sort of boils and becomes a
Isn't
superfluid.
that the 100th monkey thing, where they had what was the island where there was radioactive fallout all over the island, and the monkeys on one side of the island figured out if they washed the coconuts, they could eat them safely. And then once a certain number of monkeys figured that out, on the other side of the island, they just spontaneously started doing it. And there was some kind of...
Not only that, it's the idea of Rupert Sheldrake's idea of
morphic resonance.
Morphic resonance, where you can do an experiment on a family of rats in the UK, and you do it enough times, and all of a sudden in the US, they're solving the same problem a lot faster. That's inexplicable. Crazy. And yeah, regardless of like what anybody's feelings about Daddy Greer are, maybe the 1%. Really, like, we've not had 80 million people do a CE5 yet, but nowhere. Greer is definitely guilty of overinflating his numbers. We are nowhere near 80 million people trying this at the same time.
If you now, like, forget all the baggage that Burning Man comes with, but imagine a Burning Man event like without. How do you imagine? Imagine a Burning Man event without all the drugs and orgies. And try to imagine that. Instead,
I don't want to imagine it.
I know. Instead, everyone's just
assembly.
meditating.
It sounds like
all right. Never mind. No one would pay for that. But if you could create that event and people would all get together and meditate, I wonder what you could accomplish.
Like, what if Esalen went to Burning Man and did one of their, like, call something in at a festival?
Oh my God. Well. Okay, so real quick, Cosmic Serpent. I've got to run to the restroom real fast, but Cosmic Serpent has a question, and Xander, I think you should cover this one. He says, "Don't forget to mention the removal of the wiki pages that we're talking about."
Oh my God! Yeah.
Can you guys cover that for a second? I'll be right back.
I've been covering it.
Go ahead.
So the thing is, less than 24 hours after the interview was released, there were announcements that the pages of Chris Mellon, both Dr. Pippa Malgren and Dr. Harald Malmgren's Wikipedia pages, were nominated for deletion. And it took a few hours, and they did. They deleted Mellon's page, and they modified heavily Dr. Harald Malmgren's page. I'm not sure about Pippa's. I think they haven't touched that one yet, but it's been a whirlwind of emotions and everything because, well, what did you guys think about that?
Have they sort of... I've seen some names thrown around that it might have been like some sort of popular debunker. I don't know who that person is, but do they know if this is just like people dicking around, like just trying to get some sort of rise out of the community, or do they think that this is more of a coordinated kind of, okay, this guy's getting far too much attention, let's just attack his character like they did with Grush, like they did with Lazar,
Lou, everybody,
everyone.
Yeah, well, that if that wasn't happening, that seems coordinated against Nap, Lou. If there wasn't that history, I would say it's just how Wikipedia works, you know? But I also don't want to just name names because we don't have proof that any of them are really responsible for it. So I would prefer just to stay on the fence on it. But there is smoke. No. There is smoke, you know? I do think that it's unfortunate, some of the reactions that interview has gotten, and more importantly from people who are pro UFOs that don't like the work that, for example, Jesse is doing, or and they're putting into question the whole testimony of Malmgren, and that kind of really struck a nerve with me, and I exploded a little bit earlier today because I think that it speaks to the state of ufology right now.
Maybe somebody. We have some like Discord rules, and it's kind of an unwritten rule that you shouldn't really tag everyone in a post unless you're somebody of great power, such as myself. But you know, somebody tagged everyone earlier, saying like, "Look, guys, this isn't okay." Like, regardless of his theories on ufology, and his claims about being let in on like the inner circle and stuff, the guy is an incredible historical figure and didn't deserve to be attacked like this posthumously as well. So, like, he doesn't even have a chance to defend himself at this point. That's, I think, how can we turn this sort of event, and this is a question for Dan, how can we turn this into, as a community, let's fucking respond to this, because it's disgusting.
I think I thought the Wikipedia thing it's shitty, but I don't think it's as huge a deal as everyone's making it, for one reason. I think that society is going to be relying less and less on Wikipedia as we all have, Apple Intelligence, we have ChatGPT, we have these things. And someone else, and this is not my idea, someone said this on Twitter, and I just agree with it. I think that it's not going to be the place we go for information like it used to be. It's still a slap in the face, and right now it's shitty, but in the long term, I don't think it's going to be as big of a deal as it seems right now. But it still sucks, and it's very rude. It's just, it's rude to do.
Yeah. You talking about the Malmgren wiki thing?
Yeah, the attempted deletion and that kind of stuff.
Isn't that just, though, like, proof that it's legit? Isn't that like where there's smoke, there's fire?
Sure.
Like, obviously, it's some intelligent, whoever it is, it's someone who's like, oh, this guy just spilled the beans, so we really have to.
But regardless, like, Wikipedia may be fucked up, but, like, the interview's still there. So that's there. So I care, but I don't really care.
Yeah,
that interview is disclosure for me. Yeah. Like, that's, we talked about it a lot the last few months. We've been saying, like, well, when's that moment that it just becomes real? And I think that's it for me. Like,
I wish he could have testified. I really wish it could have been in like a court setting, but still, what he did was amazing, and we need more of these kind of deathbed discussions. It's going to be hard to top his because he's just so brilliant and was so interconnected with everything that we've ever heard about, it seems like. So thank you, Harald.
It also makes me wonder, like, who is the 27-year-old today that is in the room that's trying to, like, explain to people, how we can maybe lower the temperature and cool down things. And I behind Harald Malmgren in the interview, on the bookshelf behind him, is a book called Scary Smart by Mo Gaudat, who is somebody that I've been talking about recently.
That video you sent.
In that video, well, he's been doing a lot of interviews lately, and he said, and he's one of a growing chorus of AI experts who've been saying this. He's like, if we can all survive the next 10 years, we can get to a world that is so good you can't even imagine it. Like, imagine a world where everything is basically free, and there's no disease, and there's no hunger. Like, we could be there in a decade, but it's going to take us getting over our bullshit, and we have to do it now.
It's going to take a Malgren in the next 10 years. Someone's got to do Malgren's job for the next 10 years.
In multiple countries.
Yeah.
I think those people exist.
Yeah, they definitely do. They definitely do. And he spoke very highly of Matthew Pines. He was like, Jesse, your interview with Matthew Pines was the reason I decided to sit down with you. And I was like, well, so that tells me Matthew Pines, I'm going to have to give him another look and, like, really watch more of his stuff, because I didn't realize that he was so highly.
Yep.
The thing is that he's really connected to pretty much every important aspect of what's going on, not just UFOs. Like, he's connected to the whole crypto game. He knows a lot about AI, a lot about policy. So yeah, he kind of came out of nowhere. I know a lot of people say that he's like some kind of an op or something, but he didn't strike me as malevolent in any way. Quite the opposite, actually. He's always proactive and wants to talk about ideas, and I think it's a great addition to this whole conversation, man.
It was an interesting moment, because it occurred to me, how would you warm people up to the reality, right? Like, it would be of UFOs and contact and non-human intelligence. If you were the group that was trying to bring this information out into the open, how do you approach the world who has been saying, you've been telling them for all these years that this is not real? How do you reverse that trend? And it must be similar to, like, I'm just doing this mental exercise. If you went to North Korea and let's say that you liberated North Korea tomorrow without firing a shot, and somehow everybody's okay, and you just, like, switch off the regime in North Korea, how would you onboard millions of brainwashed North Koreans who have been living in a completely different world. You would have to do it really slowly. You would have to build this understanding. You would have to very slowly start to explain things. And it's like when they rescue POWs and they're just all shell-shocked. And we must be like that. That's got to be kind of where we are. We've been locked in this backwards way of thinking about reality and our world and living. And there's a group who's like, all this shit is real and we could have a completely different world. How do you bridge that gap? And maybe that's what we're a part of right now.
Yeah,
and maybe Matthew Pines is like he's tapped. They're just, they call him up and they go ahead, start talking about it.
Yeah. When we were talking about JFK earlier, like let's say for a second right now that he was killed over UFO knowledge. Let's say that's a fact. Can you imagine the difficulty trying to convince the general public that that's true and not being called lunatics? Like, there's no way you're going to convince everybody. Even if you show it to them on a silver platter, it's going to be tough to do that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a lot of heavy lifting, but I mean, you guys are doing it. I mean, we're all kind of doing it by having these talks. So, that's what the show is for.
We're trying to get out of that Plato's cave. That's what we're trying to do.
Yes. It feels like that, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Any last thoughts, guys, before we wrap up? I mean, do you want to just, if you could sum it up, how would you sum up this interview? How important is it to you, and what does it change for you?
Dan.
Yeah, I just, I'm pretty clear about it. I just, watching it, there's not a wasted moment. It's 3 hours and 51 minutes of a historical record that I think that every person should see, not just if you're into UFOs, just to see the kind of people that we can be, and to see someone who bravely and heroically did the right thing up against some of the most aggressive generals in history, and what we can do. But I just think it's incredibly important, Grush level information, and I'm just really grateful that he was willing to do it with his daughter Pippa. And I think that no matter what you think about Jesse Michaels, I think there was nobody that could have done this as well as he did. And thank you, Jesse, for an incredible video that we'll have forever. So I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, that was beautiful, man. I guess what I want to talk about here at the end is the fact that Harald had that meeting with that MIT director. And since then, it's like his entire life and career and events that happened afterwards were kind of planned. And that's what he alluded to at the end. And that's why I think it's very interesting that this concept of time being thrown around constantly. And yeah, if you find, I wish that everybody can find purpose like Harald did throughout his life. That's what I wish.
Yeah.
Xander, any final thoughts?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned it just now, Pavel, the whole... I don't think the last 5 minutes of that interview contains any new information, but it contains some of the most important information at the same time. The last 5 minutes especially, and I don't want to spoil too much because I do believe you need to watch the whole interview to really understand the last 5 minutes, and I think that's incredibly important that everybody watches it. But those last 5 minutes contain some of, as far as we know, the last recordings of one of the most important figures of the last 100 years. This person saved the world. He knows intimately of many of the details surrounding UAP and almost certainly the nature of existence itself. So pay the man some respect and watch the entire thing, because I promise you, you will not be disappointed. And it really is a watershed moment. It's up there with... there's a reason why this is such a popular stream tonight, because so many people have watched it already and they know how important this is. And yeah, if you've not watched it yet, it's 4 hours, but find the time to watch it.
Oh my God. It's so good. And I would just throw one last thought in there, because I think it's the significance isn't just any one. It's not any one aspect of it. It's the way that the full weight of all of the things that he's saying gives you a new holistic picture of the total situation. That if you don't have it and you're kind of like scrambling to put pieces together that don't seem to make sense. This is the 30,000 foot view that spans decades and decades and ties it all together in a way that finally starts to make some sense. And it brings to mind, of course, one of the things that they talked about. He says Colonel Corso, who wrote The Day After Roswell, Philip Corso, is legit, and that he took some of the Roswell material and was farming it out to these companies. Well, in that book, The Day After Roswell, Colonel Corso has this quote, and I'll just end it on this. He says that there's an encounter that Corso has with a craft out in the desert, and he is in charge of this gigantic facility, this radar facility, and he drives his car. He takes his car out to where a craft is sighted, and he encounters a being there. And I'm only bringing this up because what Malgren said puts this into a completely different context now that is just amazing. He encounters this craft out in the desert, and he sees it is near this rocky sort of cave area, and he goes into this cave. He gets this is Colonel Corso. He gets this psychic sense that he needs to go into this cave. Military officer, base commander, goes inside this cave, and inside the cave, he comes into contact with a being that's standing there. And he writes this in his book. He's like, it's wearing a headband, and on the headband is a little crystal, like in that Daft Punk music video, where they have they're all blue and they're playing the concert. They all got the little headband thing. And he says, this being communicated with me telepathically, and it says, I need you to turn off all of your radar systems so that I can leave in my craft. I have to be able to get out of here. And he says, Corso asked the being, what's in it for me? And the being says, a new world if you can take it. And he leaves us with this weird quote. And he goes, a new world if you can take it. Does that mean, like, what does that mean? And in the context of this interview, I get it in a way I didn't get it before. They were really talking about like a whole different world, a completely different world. And that the fact that that's real, that's powerful. I don't even know how to process that, but that is astonishing.
Can we take it?
Do we
Can we take it?
I say we can't. What is our other alternative?
Yeah.
Colonel Corso said one other thing that I think is important. And to your point, Pavel, he said, we sent 18-year-old kids into machine gun fire in World War II, and they did it. They didn't flinch. These were kids. They can handle it. And it's their world. There's the world the kids are going to grow up in. So we need to stop acting like we're the only people who make decisions and start thinking about, it is their world. They're going to have to grow up in it. So we should let them know. And that's kind of how he leaves. This is an interview he did with George Knapp like 25 years ago. It's a great interview. You can find it on YouTube. But anyway, yeah. Guys, go watch it. Thanks for being here, everyone. This has been a really great conversation. Thank you to everyone that's in the chat. Thanks to everyone who gave us a super chat tonight. Thank you all for the kind words of support and all of the positive vibes and good energy. It's great to be here with you all sharing this moment. I think it's a really astonishing time to be alive. And it's cool to get together with like-minded people and talk about this stuff. If you're not already a subscriber, please consider subscribing. It's the best way to help the channel. You can also go to teamnightshift.com. You can click on our Discord link there, become a member of our Discord community, get involved. We're doing all kinds of cool things there. Please come hang out with us. And don't be a stranger. Say something in the comments, share a video, give us a like. We appreciate it. We'll see you again next week. Until then, keep looking up.